A cheater once said if you're not cheating, you're not trying, and then they probably cheated at something. The MMA world is subject to this guideline as well. We constantly see fouls in mixed martial arts. Cup shots, cage grabs, eye pokes. Oftentimes these fouls are of no real consequence, or the referee just puts a quick stop to them. But in today's countdown, we'll be focusing on those fighters who very cleverly got away with some pretty substantial cheating, whether it was intentional or not. Look, there's no way to prove some of these fouls were committed on purpose, others are very obviously on purpose, but what matters here is the result, and results are what these fighters got. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are 10 fighters who cleverly got away with cheating. Number 10, Daniel Cormier, UFC 210. Our first entry wasn't during a fight but beforehand, and DC still had to, defeat the terrifying Rumble Johnson in a world title fight whether he was 205 pounds or 206.2, which is why it's the lowest entry on our list. But what DC did was still very clever and deserves reviewing. Here's what went down. DC heads to the scale for his official Friday weigh-in before his scheduled 205-pound title defense against Rumble Johnson at UFC 210. He steps on the scale at 206.2 pounds. He now has an hour to cut the remaining weight. Pretty standard stuff. Here is where the magic happens though. DC returns 2 minutes later and makes weight at 205 pounds and the fight is on. What in the world? Well, traditionally a towel is brought out to cover the fighter's naked body from the press during a weigh-in attempt, and DC appears to be putting pressure on that towel with his hands, reducing his weight. We've all played this game weighing ourselves in the bathroom. Fighters didn't seem too sour about it on social media, finding the trick to be a bit clever and amusing for the most part, although some were a bit more salty like Jon Jones and his opponent Rumble Johnson. In the end though, DC claimed he only held the towel to make sure the press didn't get any good shots of his junk, and nothing came of the entire incident besides another dominant win for Daniel Cormier. Number 9, Chael Sonnen, WEC 31. The next entry on our list didn't result in a victory, but it did result in a rematch. Chael Sonnen was taking on Paulo Filho at WEC 31 for the WEC middleweight title, and at the end of the second round, Chael was where he often is during his fights, dominating his opponent from top position. With just a few seconds left though, Filho caught Sonnen in a nasty armbar. Referee Josh Rosenthal, hearing Sonnen yell out in pain and seeing that his arm looked like it was about to snap in two, stepped in and called the fight. Immediately after, Sonnen is seen saying no repeatedly to Rosenthal, instantly casting doubt on the decision. Now, it's not clear here that Chael felt that his verbalization of pain was enough to warrant a stoppage, as is written in the unified rules, or if he just plain decided to deny that any of that happened. Although years later we would see a similar action by Chael in the moments just after his world title fight with Anderson Silva. Whatever the case, in his post-fight interview, Chael indicated that he did not tap and that the fight should have continued. This cast enough doubt on the finish to warrant an immediate rematch. The fight was scheduled, but Filho went into rehab, and Sonnen would then face Brian Baker instead. After that fight, Sonnen would go on to rematch Filho, but it would not be for the middleweight title as Filho missed weight. Chael won the rematch and then went on to be the American gangster in the UFC, score 1 for the bad guy. Number 8, Anderson Silva, UFC 148. We just mentioned that Chael Sonnen tapped during his first fight with Anderson Silva at UFC 117 and tried to indicate that he didn't. But it was Silva in their rematch at UFC 148 who was doing the cheating, and this was a pretty blatant foul. Their first meeting was not even a remotely close fight, with Sonnen dominating from bell to bell for nearly 5 whole rounds. It was a Hail Mary triangle attempt with just a few minutes left in the fight that secured the win for Silva. Their rematch was not going well for the champion either early on, as Sonnen secured a takedown in the opening seconds and nearly held top position for the entire first round. It looked like the same fight as before, but at the start of round 2, immediately with Sonnen's first takedown attempt, Silva would grab Chael's shorts, getting a verbal warning from referee Yves Levine. Takedown stuffed. On the next takedown attempt against the cage, Silva can be seen gripping Sonnen's shorts again, and he would keep that grip on the shorts once they were back to standing as he winged shots at Sonnen's face. Again, Yves Levine verbally warned him. Sonnen would attempt one more takedown before his ill-fated spinning back fist, and the rest is history. Silva wins. Number 7, Bryan Caraway, UFC Fight Night 42. Some fouls in MMA are fairly common and usually unintentional. We see quite a few cup shots and eye pokes on nearly every card. They're standard MMA fare. One foul we don't see very often is a fish hook, or pulling at your opponent's mouth with your hand. These types of fouls that are less common are generally dealt with by referees a bit more sternly. You can lose a point, you could potentially be disqualified. In the case of Bryan Caraway though, the ref didn't even see it. Caraway was fighting Eric Perez at UFC Fight Night 42, and in the middle of round 1, while attempting to secure Perez's neck for a rear naked choke, Caraway can be seen fish hooking Perez into position. The referee apparently did not see it because nothing was said or done about this, and then in the second round, while making sure not to shove his hand in his opponent's mouth, Caraway would win via rear naked choke. The backlash online though was swift, as it tends to be in MMA, with fans pointing out in the broadcast where the foul had occurred. Caraway's then girlfriend and corner Miesha Tate took to Facebook to defend Caraway, stating that he won in the second round and not in the first, and that it was just an accident. Caraway would give the same sentiment about the fight as well. Whatever the case was, Caraway got away scot-free. Number 6, Josh Koscheck, UFC 106 and UFC 113. It is 100% illegal to knee a downed opponent in the face. It's illegal to even attempt it. But in 2 instances, in 2 back-to-back fights, Josh Koscheck really found a way to make a meal out of a few crumbs. At UFC 106 in round 1, after stuffing several takedown attempts, Anthony Johnson threw a knee to a downed Koscheck, who immediately hit the ground in pain, holding his left eye. Mario Yamasaki stopped the fight, Koscheck was given several minutes to recover, and during that time, Detective Joe Rogan broke down the replay only to discover that the knee didn't even land and that he did get a finger in the eye, but it was his right eye, not the eye he was complaining about. Koscheck would go on to win the fight via rear naked choke in the second. In his next bout against Paul Daly, Koscheck would pull the same theatrics. There was an attempted knee off a scramble by Daly. The knee didn't even come close this time, but Koscheck took the opportunity to lay on the ground like he got hit with an anvil. The crowd booed, Rogan figured it out immediately, the fight went on and Koscheck won. Daly would try his own cheating after the fight by throwing a punch at Koscheck, but he got caught and banned from the UFC for life. Gotta be sneakier than that. Number 5. Jose Aldo, UFC 142. It's oftentimes when a fence grab is done during a takedown attempt that fans will ask, well, would they have secured that takedown if not for the other fighter cheating? And there may be no better example of that question than in the first round of Jose Aldo versus Chad Mendes at UFC 142. Mendes is a strong wrestler, and the general sentiment going into this fight was that he would need to take down the champion Aldo if he had any chance of winning. Late in round 1, Mendes would have his chance to do so. Pressing Aldo up against the cage with both hands clasped, Mendes muscled Aldo into the air for a takedown and nearly got him completely horizontal, but Aldo cleverly grabbed the fence and posted there, giving him the leverage he needed to stay on the feet. A few more failed attempts later, and Aldo would land a massive knee that would end the fight. But maybe the fight would have gone the other way entirely had his strongest takedown attempt not been thwarted by a blatant foul. Maybe Mendes gets on top and ends the fight right then. Maybe in some butterfly effect from that takedown, Conor McGregor doesn't even enter the UFC, and the entire MMA business implodes on itself by 2016. We'll never know because of a fence grab. I mean, none of that was probably going to happen, but still. Number 4, Yoel Romero, UFC 178. You know when people put the word gate at the end of something you did that you've probably done something particularly scandalous. Yoel Romero was fighting fellow middleweight contender Tim Kennedy at UFC 178 when late in round 2 Romero was beginning to fade. A few big shots by Kennedy rocked the Cuban fighter, and had the horn not sound ending the round, it looked like he would have got the finish. Romero made his way back to his stool and attempted to recover from the beating he just took. A huge cut over his left eye had opened up as well. When it was time to start round 3 though, Kennedy was up and his corner was gone. Romero was still on his stool. Referee John McCarthy was apparently concerned about the amount of Vaseline that had been applied to Romero by the UFC cutman and was trying to get them to clean Romero off. Kennedy threw his hands up in the air in protest. Yoel continued to sit on the stool, recovering, as Joe Rogan screamed about the fact that Romero was still sitting on the stool and recovering. It's unclear if Romero just took advantage of the opportunity due to the issue with the Vaseline or was simply confused, but in that moment, Stoolgate was born, and eventually Big John McCarthy would get a handle on everything and restart the fight. A few minutes later, Tim Kennedy was on the mat in a bloody heap, and Yoel Romero was the winner. The fun part about this crazy sequence of events is that the shots Kennedy landed to nearly finish the fight in the second round started when he grabbed Romero's glove illegally and pulled his hand away. MMA is fun. Number 3, Uriah Faber, UFC 181. Sometimes a foul, whether intentional or not, can change the entire direction of a fight, as was the case when Uriah Faber took on Francisco Rivera at UFC 181. Rivera had a stellar first round, stuffing Faber's takedown attempts and landing offense throughout. Round 2 looked to be starting the same way, but right after a failed takedown attempt by Faber, the fight would swiftly end with a few shots from Uriah that put Rivera against the cage, where he secured a bulldog choke and earned the victory. Upon closer replay, however, the entire sequence of events that led to the finish was started with a particularly nasty eye poke, one that the referee didn't seem to notice at all. In fact, it appears that the poke is the only thing that led to Rivera ending up against the cage where he would be choked, as the rest of the strikes that Faber threw didn't really land or do damage. The finish was reviewed by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, but they upheld the finish for some reason. The two would not rematch and never will now that Faber is retired and in the UFC Hall of Fame. Number 2, Rousimar Palhares, WSOF 22. Rousimar Palhares has a reputation for being a dirty fighter, plain and simple. It's the reason he was let go by the UFC. He held a heel hook too long on Mike Pierce at UFC Fight Night 29, and that was that. He was also kicked out of the World Series of Fighting after his bout with Jake Shields for the welterweight championship and stripped of his title for, you guessed it, holding a submission too long. But it's not Palhares' history of holding submissions for too long that has landed him on our list today. It's the blatant eye raking he did throughout his bout with Shields, and and the fact that there were zero consequences for his cheating that gave him our number 2 spot. Shields was dominating with his wrestling throughout the first and second round, as was expected in this fight. Spending the majority of those 10 minutes on his back, Palhares was desperately trying to create a better position for himself, and spending a very unusual amount of time with his fingers near Shields' eyes. It's not as apparent in round 1, but it was enough in round 2 for referee Steve Mazzagatti to deliver a warning after briefly stopping the action. When it happened again to end the second round, and Mazzagatti just gave another warning instead of, actually doing anything about it, Shields was livid, asking the referee, "Can you not see?" The referee could see, but Jake could not following the fight. Shields posted this photo of his eyes after the bout on social media. An awfully rough-looking set of eyes for a fighter who spent the majority of the fight not getting punched in the face. Number 1. Jon Jones, UFC 87, UFC 94, UFC 126, UFC 128, UFC 135, you get it. Let's be honest, you knew Jon Jones would be here. I'm sure a bunch of you already posted in the comments Jon Jones before you even started the video. And yes, Jon Jones has to top our list just by the sheer volume of his fouls. Jon Jones has indicated many times that he is not cheating when he is poking his opponents in the eyes repeatedly during his bouts, but that he is simply gauging range, and the fingers in the eyes are just incidental to that. That said, whether intentional or not, Jon Jones has a long history of poking people in the eyes during fights. I mean, like, a lot, and fighters are constantly complaining about it. It's believed that the new unified rules changing how fighters can find range is partly a result of Jon Jones and his many warnings. That said, though, Jones has never lost a fight due to a referee taking points away or disqualifying him. Other than that one time with the 12-6 elbows against Matt Hamill, but I mean, come on. So I guess if it works, it works. Jones has made fun of fans on social media for complaining about his eye pokes, posting a video where he mockingly cried and imitated the fans who are sour about his range-finding techniques. He later deleted the video because of course he did. Twitter user @SuzyKuzi did a visual breakdown of Jones's fouls for his entire UFC career leading up to UFC 200, and found that he had committed 19 fouls with 33 warnings, 1 deduction, and 7 breaks. And we haven't even mentioned the oblique kicks, which are legal but that many fighters feel is a dirty tactic as well. So much cheating, Ric Flair would shed a tear of joy. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Did anybody get away with cheating that we missed? Let us know in the comments below. Huge shout out to Tomas Welsh for editing this video together. Follow him on Instagram @BigBeatVisual. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter, and have yourself a wonderful day. Either before an event or after one are just part of the job for fighters. And while the vast majority of questions they're asked by MMA media are relevant to their camp or the fight or their opponent, every once in a while a fighter gets a question so bafflingly bad, there's no wonder that oftentimes they're not huge fans of these press events. Today we'll be counting down the absolute worst questions that have been asked of fighters, and in the interest of this list...